Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. I'm Susie Lysaght, Goodlord Senior Content Executive, and today we'll be taking a look into how to go about setting up your own lettings agency in the best way. Now, I've personally not got much experience within that field, so I've called on someone who's recently taken the plunge in setting up his own business. So Gray Toynbee, with his new sales and letting agency, Gray Toynbee. Thanks very much for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
I think that for this particular topic, learning more about you and obviously your background is pretty important just to understand, how you've got to this point, I guess, initially. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a bit more about you, filling us in on your experience in the industry, just to kick us off, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Well, I haven't actually been in estate agency for all that long. So my first foray was about 5 or 6 years ago when I joined another local company in Cambridge. But before that, I did the kind of standard graduate jobs outside of university, but then fell into property investment. So I did a few years buying, renovating, and building up a portfolio of my own, and then kind of fell into the job in estate agency a few years ago, but ended up really enjoying it and ended up being quite involved in running that business after a couple of years. So that's kind of where I got the bug for running a business. And about 18 months ago or so, maybe a bit less now, myself and my now business partner left that business and started up our own. So it's quite nice from my side to be able to have seen the industry from a buyer seller's perspective, but also now I'm in the industry and I'm on the other side of the desk and I kind of see it from our side.
It was going to be one of my questions about how you kind of made that connection, how you kind of established that as a business partnership, and you knew that it would be strong enough to be able to carry into your own business. I mean, was it just you worked with your partner for a while and then just those conversations developed, or was it always the plan?
No, certainly wasn't always the plan. We worked together for 2 or 3 years in the previous role, and actually were pretty hands-on, the two of us, in running that business really. So we worked very closely together. We had intentions to take that business forward, but for whatever reason, our goals weren't aligned with the others who were within the business. So we took the decision that we are at good points in our lives, good points in our careers, that actually it kind of makes sense for us to give it a go on our own, which was quite daunting. But what we now are kind of 2.5 months in has been a really good start. But it takes a lot of thinking about, I must say.
No, I can imagine it's obviously setting up a business. It must require a lot of planning and a lot of thought, as you say. I guess, do you think you've always had that entrepreneurial drive? Is that something that's always pushed you, and have you always thought that you might eventually set up your own business, even if it, wasn't necessarily in this field?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I effectively worked for myself before falling into agency when I was doing my property investment. So I think once you've done that for a few years, going back to being an employee is quite a tricky transition, because you're quite used to making your own decisions. You're quite used to being the master of your own destiny. So I was quite fortunate at the previous role that quite quickly myself and my now business partner ended up being quite autonomous in how we ran the business. The leap from being within a big business to a newer one wasn't quite so great for us because we had run businesses before. So that side of it, I suppose, wasn't quite so daunting. It was more the fact, I think, that we were starting completely afresh. A blank piece of paper. What do we want to call ourselves? What do we want to look like? Where we're going to base ourselves? All these questions that you don't really think about when you enter into an existing business, you have to start thinking about now. So, but very exciting and very enriching, but just loads of different things to think about.
Well, perhaps we could get into that a little bit. As you say, I mean, obviously not literally everything. We'd be here for quite a while, I suspect. What kind of steps, what hurdles do you have to jump over to get started?
Yeah, well, they kind of appear from nowhere sometimes as well. So we would sit down and think about what we wanted the business to look like, what we wanted the business to not sound like, but why we wanted it to portray us, and kind of distilling that down to a paragraph or two that's going to go on a website is quite tricky, but also making sure that it doesn't sound like everyone else in the industry. And with that, you lead to the fact that is there a gap in the market in the way that people do business that we could highlight or that we could exploit. And then you just have the practical things. Like, it took us a long time to set up a bank account, a really long time. And then you have to get premises, and you have to think about potential staff and HR and the the marketing or your software requirements and stuff. So you quite quickly, from a kind of high level, what do we want to sound and look like, drill down into the actual day-to-day, how are we actually going to do the job. It doesn't really matter what you sound and look like if you can't actually perform the function in the first place. So I think we didn't do that in a very structured manner, but it kind of fell to itself bit by bit when something came up. Because we had the experience in running a business before, we kind of knew where to go. So it didn't go. It went quite smoothly in the end, I think.
It's good to hear. I think there are a few different points there that we can probably delve into. But I mean, how long would you say that it took from conceptualizing the business and the fact that you wanted to create your own business to actually the launch day, as it were? How long would you say that process took?
It took a good few months, for 4 or 5 months probably. We launched very early May in this year, so but we'd been thinking about it for quite a long time. But kind of practically, we'd been putting the steps in probably since January time. And these things just take time. As I say, the bank account took 8 weeks to set up, and you can't run a business without having a bank account. We got a marketing team to help us with the branding and how we come across and the kind of words we use. And then, as I say, things like premises that just take a long time to find, and then negotiate the lease term and get a start date for. And then we had to do quite a lot of work in our new office to kind of make it how we wanted it to look. So it felt quite quick, the 4 or 5 months. I think quite easily it could have been 6 or 7, but we were keen to get going and get open and get operating again, because that's what we enjoy.
What would you say then? I guess you've talked about wanting to make sure that everything that you do, it kind of represents you and it sounds like you, as you put it. What's the gap? What makes your agency that bit different? How do you stand out in that area?
Yeah, it was a tricky one really, because really we all do the same thing. We all, selling a house and letting a house is the same sort of process, by and large, for everyone. So, how does one come across different to your competitors? And particularly when you're sitting in someone's living room and they've had probably 2 or 3 of you, as it were, in front of them already. And I think there has been a danger, particularly in the kind of local industry that we work in, to make it sound really complicated, to make it sound what we do is really, really clever and really complex and this, that, and the other. And actually, it's not anymore. There are processes that you go through and there are boxes to tick, absolutely. But what we do isn't particularly complex. Doesn't take a huge amount of not brain power, but understanding. I sit in the living rooms with teachers and doctors and people who do proper jobs, really. And what they do is hard. What we do isn't that difficult. And I think we try to kind of remove the layer of not smoke and mirrors, but just to say that it shouldn't be that difficult. So it shouldn't be that hard for us to do a good job for you. It's not that complex. Don't be afraid of it. And we'll do a good job, and we'll tick the right boxes and we'll get the process right, because it's not really that tricky to get it right. Which is hopefully is quite refreshing in the market that we sit in, because there is a tendency to make it sound really grandiose. And some of it can be trickier, but for the most part, we all do the same things. We're just saying that we're going to do those things slightly differently.
I would suggest you shouldn't necessarily put yourself down in oversimplifying it sometimes, because there are obviously these qualifications that agents need to acquire, or will at some point in the future. It will become a bit more of a mandatory requirement. I mean, how important is that to you in ensuring that you have all of those things up, even if like the regulation of property agents isn't currently in place?
Sure. Yeah, so myself and my co-director, who's also look after lettings, we're both, I think she's Marlo and I'm a Farler, so we're both all qualified for it. It's important. It's important to have that understanding of the legal framework that goes into lettings, to be able to apply that as well. As I said, I understand what you're saying about kind of oversimplifying it, and it's certainly not a simple process. But if you have that knowledge, it's not difficult to apply it. It's not difficult to get those qualifications if you go out and you assert yourself and you make time to go and do it. It's just having the motivation to go and do so. The challenge for us, I think, is communicating to landlords why it's valuable, because I'm sure there's some stats on it somewhere, but I suspect more agents than not don't have the qualifications. Plenty might be ILA registered or registered with another body, but I don't know how that balance sits. So communicating to landlords that actually there's real value in that, sometimes only happens if something's gone wrong for them somewhere else, because they missed something or something wasn't quite done the right way. So that's a challenge in our industry, I think, is trying to communicate how valuable having that knowledge is.
And I guess on the topic of challenges, you are setting up a new business, and it is an area where, despite the fact that we've obviously talked about what makes you stand out and what makes you different, there are other businesses in the field, estate and letting agents. They've been around for a while. So what are the challenges that you found in joining this industry so far, kind of 2.5 months in, what are you anticipating perhaps?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, because both myself and my business partner have been in the local industry for a while, we kind of hope that our names might, people might recognise the name, that they worked with us before. And I think to a certain extent they have, but actually we perhaps underestimated, something we've learned certainly in the first few months, is the power of familiarity, can't even say it, because we're a new brand. It looks interesting, but I'm not sure I'm going to use you quite yet. I want to see how you're going to get on in the first few months. And we've got lots of very well established brands in our local area, who some I'm sure will do a great job, but people will be drawn to them because they are familiar with the way they look more than the service or the fees or whatever it might be, and there's a great deal of comfort in that. So that's been a challenge for us, is just getting into the doorway, I suppose, and speaking to potential new clients on the back of a brand new and looking quite different brand compared to what else is out there.
How are you going about getting those conversations, or perhaps, establishing your brand a bit more and making people more aware of it? I'm assuming that sort of marketing in whatever format it may be must come into this. What are you doing in that area?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah, because the kind of success breeds success in this industry, as you know. So if you put a house on the market on Rightmove or on Zoopla, people will look at it, and if you're a landlord, you might think, oh, they're letting that house down the road. I might call them up. If you're thinking of selling, or someone's selling down the road, I might call them up. So the more you have on the market, the more boards you get up, the more exposure you get. So for us, it was about spending what budget we had on marketing in the right manner so that we could increase our exposure. Thankfully, we started off with a small but a portfolio of properties from day one, so we could put boards up on those straight away. And we invested fairly heavily in the portals, so that even if we didn't have listings on there from the outset, we had a presence on there, so people saw the brand. But we are aware that's going to take a while to kind of filter through, and people to call us because they've seen our brands rather than because they want the house that we're selling or letting. And it is a challenge for any new business, but particularly in a crowded marketplace.
I think as well, like obviously, looking at your website, it is quite sleek, I suppose is the word. I mean, it looks like you have put the effort into establishing that when you're not as well known as some of the established brands out there, perhaps not necessarily you as people, but in terms of the brands themselves, having that initial digital shop front as well as your branch. As you said, you've already had to put thought into what that looks like. It must be take quite a bit of brainstorming around that, trying to refine exactly what you want to present to people.
It did, actually, and that's a great point. That having an office presence is a great advertising for us. We had crossed our minds: did we need one? Did we need a physical office? Because we based ourselves initially in a WeWork in town, so we didn't have any presence, but we were working together, and the cost of an office and everything that goes with it's quite high. But we got quite lucky with where we're based. We're on a corner on a junction, so people often stop in their cars at the lights and they look in. But actually, it's probably the best spend that we've spent for advertising indirectly, because we have a permanent presence on a busy road with our name on it, and people see it. Whether they walk in or not, it isn't really the point. Is whether they go to the website and pick up the phone or continue to recognise the brand when they drive past.
And in terms of, when you started to get set up, was there anything that you came across that you thought, well, that's unexpected, whether it was an opportunity or whether it was a challenge? Is there anything that you didn't plan for that happened?
I'm not sure in terms of kind of setting up the business. I think the market took us by surprise when we started. So the Cambridge market is renowned for being pretty busy anyway, but when we put our first property on the market, we couldn't quite believe the volume of phone calls we got, and we weren't quite prepared for it, I suppose, because we were expecting a fairly slow start in the sense that we're a new business and we had contacts, but nothing more. And I think we quickly had to make sure that we had the processes in place and the kind of the manpower, I suppose, to deal with what the market was throwing at us. Because ideally we'd do one viewing, sell the house, but of course you can't do that. So we had loads of viewings. So we had to start getting organised in terms of who was going to be where and doing what. And we I think expected to have a slightly slower start and kind of ease ourselves into it. But ever since we started, actually since early May, the market has continued at that pace. I suspect it will slow down. But it was a bit of a wake-up call for us. You're back in work now. And you need to get on it. That was probably the thing that took us most by surprise.
How did you cope with that?
Yeah, so there are three of us now, and we're desperately trying to find a fourth and fifth. The recruitment is also tricky at the moment. But because we come from a larger business, we did have the intent to build ours from day one to be scalable. So we took on particular software packages, good Lord, and our property management software that could be scalable pretty quickly. So we had all that in the background. I think it was more a kind of organizational thing between the three of us as to who's going to be where, when, because when there's only so few of you in the office, but you need that presence, you need to organize your time really, really well while still being able to service the business that you have and going out to find more. So I think that was the biggest challenge initially, and probably the one that we still face now, because we are very busy with houses to let and to sell, and trying to find an extra pair of hands or two to help us with our office presence, to make sure that we can always keep the office covered while we're out actually doing the day job.
And in terms of that scalability, it's obviously does sound like it's something that you've planned for, but when we're talking about setting up a new business, how far ahead do you plan?
I think probably in a level of detail, probably the first 12 months. And then we have kind of broader ideas for 2-year, 3-year, 5-year plans. But, if we don't hit that 12-month period, then the 2, 3 and 5-year plan don't matter anyway. So we have a pretty solid kind of roadmap as to how we see the business going in their first 12 months. And we hope we can achieve it. But I suspect we'll reassess that 10 months in, and then look at the kind of the 2-year and the 3-year plan, and just see whether we've hit the kind of benchmarks we set ourselves for the number of houses we were going to sell, or the number of units for lettings that we've got on our books, and whether we've got sufficient staff on board to support us going forward. So really in detail the first 12 months, because we just knew that was crucial. If we were still here in 12 months' time, we were doing okay.
I mean, in terms of things that you've carried over, the learnings that you've brought over again, now that you've been doing this for a few months now, what would you say is the biggest thing that you took from your past experience? Whether it is in the property industry, whether it's just generally that you think that has helped you so far make this a success in your new venture?
Yeah, so far, probably not to be too negatively impacted by things that don't quite go your way. So the premises that we're now in, we initially weren't successful in securing the lease for, and there were very few on the market. There were very few good options, and I remember sitting in the WeWork with my business partner thinking, we can't do this without a proper office presence, because we decided that that's the route we were going to go down, and if there's nowhere for us to go, how are we going to do it? As luck would have it, the lease that had been or was being negotiated on it before us fell through, and they came back to us and we got it. So I think from that we'll learn that there might be immediate letdowns or disappointments, but actually there'll be another opportunity. There'll be if it's another office to lease, or there'll be another house to sell, or another house to let, or there'll be another employee to hire. So I think it's kind of that side of it, not to be too disheartened when things don't go exactly as to plan, because more often than not, there'll be another opportunity around the corner.
And I mean, in terms of other agents or other entrepreneurs, like I say, perhaps out there that are considering setting up their own business within this field, what would you say the top things that they should consider and the things that they should really prioritize? I know that we've gone through some of the steps and the things that you did have to consider, but what would you say are the most important out of those?
I think a big plus for my business partner, Alex, and I, was the fact that we were in the kind of right stage of our careers, really. So we had experience in running a business, even if it wasn't the one that we owned in entirety. So we weren't too daunted by the prospect of doing so. And I think it's easy to take the jump too early, and it's also very easy to not take the jump at all and do it too late. So I think getting the timing right is pretty key for one's own personal experience, but also almost being a kind of jack of all trades, because you need to be you need to be able to understand the finance, you need to be able to understand the marketing and the HR and the, how an office goes together and how a lease will work, or how do you run the finances of the business once you start making money. So just having an awareness that there are all these different things that go into it, and it's not just being able to sell and let a house, which is obviously important, but if you can't do the things behind it, then you won't have the time either to do the day job. So one needs to be open to learning about everything, whether you think they're exciting or not, because actually when it comes to running the business, they're pretty imperative.
That all seems quite useful advice as well for when you're looking at expanding your business and taking on new staff and new team members as well. I suppose it's just bearing that in mind. I mean, are there any other skills that you would say that you do look for, the kind of like your ideal estate agents, as it were, or estate letting agents?
Probably the softer skills, if I'm honest. So it's probably the, when I interview someone for either the sales or lettings job, if I like them, if they're engaging when you speak to them, if they're confident when they speak, the kind of technical side of it, the process side of it, to a greater or lesser extent, you can learn, you can teach. But if you can engage with someone and be interested in people just naturally, that's always really key, because this is I know we buy and sell and rent properties, but actually it's about the people. People will choose to sell their houses through us because they trust us and they like us, or let their houses through us because they trust us and like us. So if we can have people around us who are can be engaging and can communicate well, that will really help. And that's kind of that's what I would look for when someone walks into an interview, is that confidence and that ability to talk to anyone, really, and talk to anyone, whether they are a 30-something full-time employed person or they are a 70, 80-year-old retiree. They need to be able to engage with anyone at any level and confidently.
No, that does make complete sense, as much as I think that you're talking about some of the software in the background and things that do help agents do their job in the right way. It is all to help them be able to speak more with their customers and have more of that communication and so on with them. So it makes sense that those are the sorts of skills that you'd be looking for.
It is, yeah. And actually, we made a bit of a play of that on our website in our branding, that I think there's a danger when it comes to technology that it's used to distance yourself from your client, to make things automated, which can be really useful. But actually what we wanted ours to do is to integrate ourselves more with our clients. So it's a small thing, but we've got a WhatsApp link on our website, so you can WhatsApp us at any time. And that people have loved that. They've really enjoyed communicating us via WhatsApp because it's far more informal and it's far more common to what a lot of people that we're working with are used to using. They're on their phones WhatsApping their mates anyway. So it's little things like that we hope will just make us stand out a little bit from the crowd, but also make it much easier for our clients and our landlords and vendors to communicate with us.
Do you think that is sort of the direction that the industry is heading in, perhaps that bit more of a informal stance? Do you think that other agents will cotton on to this?
I'm sure they will. Yeah, I think it's a sign of the times, really. I think the need for us to kind of hear and recognise what the younger generation, the kind of the 30 to 50 generation are doing in terms of how they communicate and the methods in which they use and they're more comfortable with. Definitely, and I'm sure not just our industry. I'm sure lots of service industries will be looking at the way that they manage their clients and communicate with them and thinking, are we 10 years behind, or are we listening and actually doing or using the methods in which that will be most effective? So it's actually, for myself and for my colleagues, it's easier for us because, again, we're on our phones and we can communicate quickly back and send a quick message without having to write a long formal email or having to be sat at your desk. So it kind of helps, hopefully it kind of helps everyone.
And on this topic, I mean, do you have any kind of final considerations, any top advice that you'd give to others out there that are looking to set up their own business, set up their own estate agency so that they can do it in a successful way like you have so far?
I would say think it through, absolutely, because it's a hell of a leap. Working for yourself or being reliant upon yourself for your livelihood, I suppose. But it's the most rewarding thing you'd ever do. But there'll be some times when you think, oh, why did I bother? Or, why am I causing this sort of stress? Why have I got this sort of financial responsibility? But if you have the right mentality and you're motivated for it, there's nothing better. There's nothing better than walking into an office that has your name on, or that you own, or you're responsible for. But it does require kind of brain power and thought process 24/7. While I don't have to be in the office for those really long hours, I'm always thinking about it. I'm always thinking what's next, what we're going to need next, what does the business need next, and I love it and I enjoy it. So that it doesn't feel like a chore to me, but it's all encompassing. So I referred to earlier about make sure you're in the right stage of your own life to be able to do it, and that's pretty key. I think have you got the time to dedicate to it? Have you got the enough brain capacity to be able to think about everything you need to think about at that time, because the first 6 months setting up and the next 6 months of the first 6 months of the business are all encompassing. But if you enjoy that sort of thing, there is nothing better.
No, it certainly sounds like you have to be very invested in your business in order to make sure that you do get it to it. You need to push yourself to make it a success.
Of course, yeah.
And I guess just my final question, just to wrap it up, really, you're talking about being invested in it. You obviously are invested in your business, in the industry. You've already talked about how the volume of demand that you've had coming through has already surprised you. Would you say, therefore, that you are positive, presumably, about the industry at large? You think that it's heading in the right direction and that the future's looking positive for it?
Yeah, the market. I mean, the market that we happen to sit in Cambridge can be fairly insulated from the rest of the wider market because of the uniqueness of the city itself. We're incredibly busy, but I'm sure that'll slow down autumn, winter time. There are kind of pressure points in terms of the interest rates and just the seasonal changes that comes with demand. But I think in the wider space, the market over the medium and long term, I think it looks fairly positive, but I wouldn't be surprised over the next 6 to 12 months to see it certainly slow down in terms of volume and prices, whether they drop or they just stagnate. I don't know, but I don't think it will continue at this pace that we currently see. In terms of the industry itself, I think the continued push for qualifications and recognition of experience is pretty key. I think some of my potential clients will want to sit in their living rooms and I say anyone can be a letting agent, anyone can do this. There's no minimum barrier to entry. I'm always quite surprised, but I think that a lot needs to be done to kind of push the value of experience and qualifications and knowledge. Arla are great and they're very supportive, but I do think it's a big challenge of ours, and I found it before, explaining why there's good value in having people who are qualified to do lettings or potentially sales in the future, and that will be a challenge for the industry because it's so competitive. Fees can be the method in which you try and win a transaction if you're going to go low on the fees, but actually a race to the bottom is not going to suit anyone. It should be about quality. It should be about providing a good service, and that I think that will be the challenge that the industry as a whole faces over the next couple of years, probably.
I think that through our discussions, the importance of all of those things, planning, timing, looking at making sure that you are giving customers what they want, and just to make sure that the whole industry is heading in the right direction. It's hopefully listeners out there will be able to take some good tips from that and be able to apply it if they're looking at, if they're quite early stage or if they're looking at starting their own agency as well. So thank you ever so much for taking the time just to talk through your experiences so far, and perhaps in a year or so's time we'll be able to come back together and we'll have a catch up then and see how it's going then.
I hope so. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.